The Easter ham was still warm when my daughter-in-law set it on the table. I watched her carry it out like she was presenting something she had made herself. She hadn't. I had. I'd been in that kitchen since 7 in the morning, peeling potatoes, stirring the glaze, checking the oven every 20 minutes the way my mother taught me. But she set it down at the head of the table like it belonged to her, like the whole afternoon belonged to her, and nobody said a word. I told myself it was fine. It was Easter. My son was happy. My grandchildren were running through the hallway in their church clothes, and the windows were open, and the light was coming in gold and warm, the way April light does in Tennessee. I told myself this was enough, that I was enough just by being there. My name is Cecile. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 41 years working as a school librarian in Knoxville. I know how to be quiet in a room. I know how to watch and wait and not make a scene. I learned that early, and I carried it my whole life like something I was proud of. I should have put it down sooner. My son's name is, I'll just call him my son, because this isn't about shaming him. Not entirely. He's 41 years old, and I love him the way you love something you grew inside your own body, something that cost you everything and you paid it gladly. That kind of love doesn't disappear, but I've learned it doesn't have to make you foolish either. He married 9 years ago. She came from money, or she acted like she did, which in my experience amounts to the same thing in terms of how a person carries themselves in your home. From the beginning, she looked at my house in Knoxville the way people look at things they're already deciding what to do with. Not rude exactly, just assessing. Always assessing. For the first few years, I thought I was being too sensitive. I'm good at talking myself out of what I see clearly. Ask any woman my age and she'll tell you the same thing. We spent so many years being told we were imagining it, overreacting, being difficult. So we learned to doubt ourselves before anyone else had to. I drove down to Nashville that Easter Friday. 5 hours. I brought the ham, the potato casserole, the rolls I'd made from scratch, and a coconut cake that my son had asked for specifically. He'd called me 2 weeks before and said, "Mama, you know what I've been thinking about? Your coconut cake." And I said, "Then I'll bring it. Because that's who I am. That's who I've always been." I got to their house around 2 in the afternoon. My daughter-in-law met me at the door. She hugged me the way people hug you when they're performing warmth rather than feeling it. Quick, high on the shoulder, already pulling back before you can settle in. She said, "Cecile, you didn't have to bring all this." But she didn't help me carry it in. My son was in the backyard with his brother-in-law, watching something on a tablet. He waved at me through the glass door. He didn't come in. I put the food in the kitchen. I found space in the refrigerator myself. I said hello to the children, my 2 grandchildren, 7 and 9, who at least were genuinely happy to see me. The 7-year-old grabbed my hand and pulled me to show me something she'd drawn. I sat with her for 20 minutes on the floor of her room, looking at her drawings, and that was the best 20 minutes of the whole weekend. Dinner that evening was fine. Not warm, but fine. My daughter-in-law talked mostly to her own mother, who was also visiting, about a renovation they were planning for the kitchen. I listened. I smiled when it seemed appropriate. My son talked to me about my drive down, about the weather, about whether I'd watched a show he'd recommended. The coconut cake was eaten completely, and my son said it was perfect, and I believed him because that part, at least, was real. I was staying in their guest room. It was a nice room. I want to say that because I'm not trying to make this into something it wasn't. The room was clean and the bed was comfortable and there were fresh towels folded on the chair. But here's what I noticed, and this is the thing I keep coming back to. There was a door in that guest room. Not the door to the hallway, another door on the far wall that connected to a small sitting room. I'd noticed it on previous visits, but it had always been locked. That weekend, the first night, I got up around 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. I never sleep well away from home, and I noticed the door was slightly open. Not open, just ajar, the way a door sits when the latch doesn't catch all the way. I didn't think anything of it. I pushed it closed and went back to bed. The next morning, I came downstairs and my daughter-in-law was in the kitchen on the phone. She lowered her voice when I walked in. Not dramatically, just enough. The way you lower your voice when you don't want to stop the conversation, but you also don't want to be heard. I poured myself a cup of coffee and went to sit at the kitchen table, and she turned slightly away from me and finished the call. When she hung up, she was perfectly pleasant. She asked if I'd slept well. I said I had. She said, "We have an errand to run this morning. Would you mind watching the kids for a couple hours?" I said, of course. They left around 9:30, both of them. My son didn't say much about where they were going, just errands. I watched the kids, made them pancakes, played 2 rounds of a card game the older one liked. Around noon, my daughter-in-law texted to say they'd be back by 1. They came back at 2:30. My son looked tired in a way I recognized. Not physically tired, but the way a person looks when they've been concentrating very hard on something and now have to pretend they haven't. Lunch was leftovers. That's fine. It was Easter Saturday. I didn't expect a production. But my daughter-in-law served the ham I had brought. My ham, my glaze, the one I'd stood over for 3 hours, sliced cold on a plate in the center of the table with crackers on the side like it was a cheese board. And she served her own mother and her mother's boyfriend first, and then the children, and then my son, and then herself, and then, when everyone had taken what they wanted, she passed the plate to me. What was left were the smaller end pieces, the parts where the glaze had burned slightly at the edge. I took them. I said thank you. I ate them. I didn't say anything because I still wasn't sure if I was being oversensitive. That's the thing about a lifetime of talking yourself out of what you see. You get very good at it, almost too good. But something had shifted in me. Some quiet thing that had been patient for a long time was done being patient. After lunch, I told them I was going to lie down. Instead, I sat in the guest room and I thought, I'm good at thinking. 41 years in a library will do that for you. You learn to sit still with a question until it shows you its answer. What I was thinking about was the phone call, the lowered voice, the errand that took 5 hours, the way my son had looked when he came home. And then I thought about something that had happened 6 months before, a conversation I'd nearly forgotten. My son had called me and asked, very casually, very offhandedly, whether I had a will. I said yes. He asked if I'd thought about whether it was up to date. I said I thought it was fine. He said he just wanted to make sure I was taken care of, and the conversation moved on and I thought nothing of it. I thought about it now. I got up and I looked around the room. I'm not proud of this, but I did it and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I opened the drawer of the bedside table. I looked in the small desk in the corner, and then I remembered the door that had been ajar. The sitting room. I went through the door. It was a small room, a reading room, with a love seat and a bookshelf and a writing desk by the window. Very tidy. On the desk, there was a manila folder. I stood there for a moment. I want to be honest about this. I almost didn't open it. There's a version of me that would have walked back out, closed the door, gone downstairs and had a glass of sweet tea and convinced herself she was imagining everything. I almost was that version. I've been that version most of my life. But I opened the folder. Inside was a document, several pages stapled together with a law firm's letterhead at the top. I know how to read legal documents, not because I'm a lawyer, but because I'm a librarian and I spent decades helping people find information and understand what things meant. I read slowly. I read carefully. It was a petition for guardianship. My son was in the process of filing to become my legal guardian. The document cited concerns about my cognitive decline. It mentioned that I had been exhibiting signs of confusion and difficulty managing finances. It used the phrase, best interest of the family, more than once. It included, as supporting documentation, a letter. I had to read this twice, a letter that appeared to be from my doctor. I sat down on the love seat because my legs needed a moment. My doctor, a man I had seen for 11 years. I thought about the last time I'd visited him back in January for my annual checkup. My son had called ahead of time and asked if he could attend, said he was concerned about my health, said he wanted to be supportive. I'd thought it was sweet. I'd let him come. He'd sat in the corner of the exam room and I'd answered the doctor's questions, and at one point my son had mentioned, very gently, that I'd gotten confused about some dates recently. I'd laughed it off. The doctor had made a note. That note was now in a legal document. I sat in that small room with the folder in my lap, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even hurt. Not exactly. Not yet. It was more like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you've been squinting at something for a long time, and then the light changes, and suddenly you see it completely. I saw it completely. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. I smoothed the pages. I closed the door behind me. I went to my room and I washed my face and I went back downstairs and I helped set the table for dinner. My son asked if I was feeling all right. I said I was just a little tired from the drive. He nodded and touched my shoulder and said, "Get some rest tonight, Mama." I smiled at him. After dinner, I called my younger sister, Winifred. She's 63, lives in Atlanta, and she is the sharpest person I have ever known. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Cecile, listen to me. You do not sign anything. You do not mention what you found. You go home tomorrow and you call Lena. Lena is my attorney. I've had her for 20 years. She handles my property, my will, everything." I said, "I know." Winifred said, "I need you to hear me when I say this isn't your fault." I said, "I know that too." I wasn't sure I believed it yet, but I said it. I slept very little that night, not from distress, or not only from distress, but because I was thinking clearly and I needed the time to think. I went over everything: the phone call, the errand, the doctor's appointment in January, the casual conversation about my will, the folder with my name on it and words like cognitive decline printed neat and formal on a law firm's letterhead. And I thought about my ham, cold on a plate, served last. By 3 in the morning, I had made every decision I needed to make. I came downstairs early, 6 o'clock. My daughter-in-law was still asleep. My son was in the kitchen with coffee. Just the two of us. That hasn't happened often in the past 9 years, and I noticed it felt different than it used to. Or maybe I was different. He asked if I wanted eggs. I said, "No, thank you." He said, "You sure you're okay? You seem a little off." I looked at him. My son, the boy I raised in a small house in Knoxville on a librarian's salary after his father left, I taught him to read. I drove him to basketball practice and helped him with his college applications and lent him money twice without being asked to pay it back. I love him the way you love someone you built yourself, piece by piece, over decades. I said, "I found the folder." He went very still. He started to say something. I could see him arranging the words, getting ready to explain or deny or redirect, and I held up my hand. Just once. And he stopped. I said, "I'm not going to talk about this here. I'm going to go home today, and then I'm going to make some phone calls, and then we'll talk." He said, "Mama, it's not what you think." I said, "I read it. It's exactly what I think." He said, "I was just trying to protect you." And there it was. I've heard that sentence my whole life in different mouths about different things. I was just trying to protect you. As if protection is something that gets done to you without your knowledge or your consent, with your signature forged into documents while you're upstairs sleeping. I said, "I don't need that kind of protection." I went upstairs and I packed my bag. I said goodbye to my grandchildren. The 7-year-old hugged me around the waist, and I held on for an extra moment. I told her I loved her. That part was easy. My daughter-in-law came out of the bedroom as I was getting my keys. She had her bathrobe on, and she looked at me and then at my son, and I could see her doing the calculation. I nodded at her. Just nodded. She nodded back. There wasn't anything else to say. I drove home to Knoxville. 5 hours. I had the windows down for part of it, through the mountains where the air still had some cold in it even in April. I stopped at a diner in Cookeville and had a piece of pie and coffee and sat by the window watching the parking lot. I wasn't sad exactly, or I was, but underneath the sadness was something steadier, something that had been there a long time and just needed to be found. I got home in the early evening. I walked through my house that I have owned for 22 years, that I painted myself and fixed myself and paid for with my own hands. I walked through every room. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The next morning, I called Lena. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about her. When I finished, she said, "Cecile, I need you to come in this week." I went in on Wednesday. What she told me was this: the guardianship petition was real and it had been filed, but it was in early stages and nothing had been finalized. My son's attorney had used the doctor's note, but the note itself was vague. It mentioned that I'd seemed slightly disoriented at one appointment, which in context meant I'd gotten confused about a date, which I had explained at the time as a bad night's sleep. It was thin. Lena said it wouldn't hold. But there was more. My son had also been in contact with my bank. He had requested to be added to 2 of my accounts as a cosigner, citing again concerns about my ability to manage my finances. The bank had sent me a letter about it. I had received the letter back in February. I had thought it was routine and set it aside. I sat in Lena's office and I thought about all the things I had set aside. We spent 2 hours that afternoon. By the time I left, I had done the following. I had updated my will. I had changed the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts and my life insurance. I had closed the accounts my son had been trying to access and moved those funds to accounts he knew nothing about. I had added Winifred as my emergency contact and healthcare proxy. And I had written a letter, Lena helped me draft it, to my doctor, formally requesting that my son be removed from my approved contacts list and requesting a full copy of my medical records going back 3 years. Lena also wrote a letter to my son's attorney. It was polite, it was precise. It said in language I found quietly beautiful that any guardianship petition based on the existing documentation would be contested, and that the petitioner should be aware of the legal implications of filing on false or insufficient grounds. I don't know exactly when my son received that letter. I know it was a Thursday because that was when his text messages started. At first they were calm. He said he needed to talk. He said I was misunderstanding everything. He said he was worried about me. Then, when I didn't respond, they became less calm. He said I was being irrational. He said this proved his concerns. He said he was going to have to escalate. I didn't respond to any of them. Winifred called me every evening that week. She didn't ask me how I was feeling, which I appreciated. She just talked to me about regular things. Her garden, a book she was reading, a neighbor's dog that had gotten loose again. She let me exist in normal life while the other thing processed itself in the background. I don't know if she knew that was what I needed or if she was just being herself, but either way, it was the exact right thing. My daughter-in-law called once. I almost didn't answer. I answered. She said, "I want you to know I didn't know how far it had gone." I listened. She said, "I knew he was worried about you. I didn't know about the bank. I didn't know about the doctor." I said, "Do you believe what he said about me? That I'm in cognitive decline?" There was a pause, a long one. She said, "No." I said, "Thank you for calling." I hung up. I'm not sure what she expected from that conversation. Maybe she was hoping I'd tell her it was all going to be fine. I couldn't tell her that because I didn't know if it was. I still don't know what my son's marriage looks like on the inside. I know it's complicated. I know she's not the only one responsible for what happened. I know my son made his own choices. That's the thing that took the longest to sit with. Not what he did, but why. And I think I know the why. I think somewhere in the last decade I had stopped being his mother and started being his resource, not because he was evil, because I had let it happen. I had been so proud of being needed, of being the one who showed up, who cooked, who helped, who never said no, that I had trained him to expect it. I had made myself into something he could use without meaning to. I had been so happy to be wanted that I had forgotten to notice when being wanted crossed over into being taken. I'm not saying this to excuse him. What he did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. But I'm old enough now to look at a thing clearly and see all of it, not just the part that makes me the victim. It's been 4 months. My son and I have spoken twice on the phone. The conversations were short and careful, the way conversations are when the people having them know they're building something but aren't sure yet what it's going to be. I told him I loved him and I meant it. I told him I was not going to live under someone else's management of my life, and I meant that too. He said he understood. I don't know yet if he does. My grandchildren sent me drawings for my birthday last month. The younger one drew a picture of me in my library. She's only been there once, but she remembered it exactly. The high ceilings, the green lamps. I put it on my refrigerator. I look at it when I make my coffee in the morning. My house is quiet in a way I've come to appreciate. I cook what I want, when I want. I read until late. I open the windows when the air is good and I close them when it isn't. Nobody decides that for me. Last week, I went back to see my doctor. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to look him in the eye and have a real conversation, one where my son wasn't in the corner of the room translating my answers into something else. The doctor was thoughtful about it. He apologized for the note. He said he should have spoken to me directly before putting anything in writing. I told him I accepted that, and I told him what I needed going forward: transparency, directness, and the understanding that I am the patient and my medical decisions are mine. He said, "Of course," I said, "then we're fine." On the way home, I stopped at the same bakery I've been going to for 15 years and I bought myself a slice of coconut cake, not because anyone asked for it, not because I was bringing it somewhere, just because I wanted it. I sat at a table by the window and I ate it slowly and I watched the street and I thought about nothing in particular. It tasted exactly the way it was supposed to. I've had a long time to think about what happened that Easter weekend. Not just what my son did, but what I did or didn't do for years before any of it came to a head. And I think that's the part that matters most, if I'm being honest with myself. There's a kind of giving that comes from genuine love. You cook the meal, you drive the 5 hours, you lend the money, and you don't keep score because you don't want to keep score. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. But there's a line, somewhere in there, where love starts doing something else, where it stops teaching and starts enabling, where the person on the receiving end stops feeling grateful and starts feeling owed. I crossed that line somewhere, and I kept walking past it for years without looking back. I don't say this to punish myself. I say it because it's true and because I think the truth of it is the only useful thing that came out of all of this. What we practice, we become. What we allow, we invite more of. I had practiced making myself indispensable, and I had allowed my son to build his expectations around my unlimited availability. That's not entirely his failure. Some of it is mine. What I know about Cecile, about myself, is that I am not a woman without resources. I have a mind that works. I have a sister who loves me straight and doesn't soften things to spare my feelings. I have an attorney I've trusted for 20 years. I had every tool I needed to protect myself, and the only thing standing between me and using them was my own reluctance to believe I needed to. That reluctance is what I had to let go of, not the love, not the relationship such as it is now, being rebuilt slowly and carefully, just the reluctance, the reflex that said, "Don't make a scene, don't be difficult, don't trust what you're seeing." That reflex had been protecting my comfort for decades while slowly costing me everything else. Winifred said it wasn't my fault. I believe her now, more than I did then. But I also believe that fault isn't the most useful question. The more useful question is, what do I do now with what I know? And the answer I came to, sitting in Lena's office, signing documents, watching my own life become mine again, is that I act. Clearly, quietly, and without waiting for permission. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't make speeches. It sits in a small room with a folder in its lap, and it reads carefully, and it decides, and then it acts. I found that strength in myself at 67 years old. I wish I had found it sooner, but I have it now, and I am not putting it down. If you are someone who has been giving and telling yourself that love means you don't get to have limits, I want you to hear this. A limit is not a withdrawal of love. A limit is a statement of self-respect, and self-respect is not something you earn by being good enough for long enough. It's something you decide to have, today if you want, right now. That coconut cake I bought myself that afternoon tasted exactly right, not because it was the best cake I'd ever had, because I chose it for myself, with no one to please and nowhere to be. That's what freedom tastes like, quiet and unhurried and entirely your own.